The rain fell like shattered memories against the fogged windows of the old Victorian house, each drop a whisper of what Sarah had lost. She sat in the dim kitchen, her fingers tracing the rim of a cold coffee mug, the steam long gone, much like the warmth that once filled her days with her husband. His accident replayed in her mind, a screech of tires, a final glance leaving her adrift in this creaking relic of a home far from the city lights that mocked her solitude. Echo, the German shepherd she'd pulled from the shelter's euthanasia list just days ago, lay sprawled before the cellar door, his massive frame, unnaturally still eyes locked on the weathered wood as if it held the ghost of a command. His breath came in shallow rhythms syncing with the storm's distant thunder, but he wouldn't move, wouldn't eat his scarred muzzle pointed like an arrow toward secrets buried below. Sarah watched him, her heart a hollow echo, wondering if this broken dog mirrored her own refusal to step forward into life. The house sighed around them walls, leaning in like eavesdroppers, the air thick with damp earth and unspoken grief. The house crouched on the edge of a forgotten rural town, its Victorian bones warped by decades of neglect, paint peeling like old skin under the relentless autumn downpour. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of mildew and aged timber, the floors groaning underfoot as if protesting Sarah's every step. Flickering candlelight cast long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the walls where faded wallpaper curled at the edges, revealing glimpses of darker stains beneath. The cellar door, sealed with a rusted padlock that seemed more ceremonial than secure, stood at the end of a narrow hallway, its surface scarred by scratches that could have been from claws or desperate hands. Echo's hackles rose subtly, a low vibration humming through his body as he stared, unblinking his ears, twitching at phantom sounds from below, a faint rustle like dry leaves skittering over bone. Sarah felt the chill seep through her sweater, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within, thunder rolling like a warning she couldn't quite heed. The isolation pressed in the nearest neighbor's lights, barely visible through the sheets of rain, a dim beacon that offered no comfort. Echo's growl started as a rumble in his chest, barely audible, but it sent a shiver up Sarah's spine, hinting that the door wasn't just a barrier. It was a veil, thin and trembling between her fragile new beginning and something ancient, hungry for revelation. Sarah's gaze lingered on Echo, his unyielding form, a statue carved from the same stone as her grief, and something inside her fractured like thin ice underfoot. She pressed her palms against her temples, the room spinning in a haze of rain-blurred memories, her husband's laugh echoing through their old apartment, now silenced by that rainy night, the screech of metal twisting like a knife in her chest. Why had she adopted this dog, this mirror of her own paralysis? Her breath hitched shallow and ragged, as if the air itself conspired to suffocate her. She slid down the wall knees, buckling the cold floor, seeping through her jeans like regret. Internal whispers clawed at her. "You're no savior, Sarah. You couldn't save him. How can you save this broken thing?" Echo's eyes flicked toward her for a split second, not in judgment, but in shared emptiness, and that fleeting connection pierced her numbness, drawing a silent sob that lodged in her throat like a stone. She reached out a trembling hand toward him, only to pull back, fingers curling into fists, afraid that touching his scars would unravel her own. The storm outside mocked her fragility, thunder rumbling like the accusation she hurled at herself in the dead of night, leaving her curled in the hallway's shadows, a woman dismantled by the weight of what she couldn't fix. Her heart pounded a dirge, each beat a reminder that moving forward meant facing the abyss, and she wasn't ready. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Echo's ears perked suddenly, a subtle shift in his rigid posture, as if the cellar door exhaled a breath it had been holding for decades. A faint scratching echoed from below like nails dragging across forgotten wood, too deliberate to be the wind or settling beams, sending a ripple through the air, thick with unspoken warnings. Sarah lifted her head, her tear-streaked face catching the candle's flicker, a chill crawling up her spine like ivy claiming an abandoned wall. Echo's tail flicked once, a hesitant wag that wasn't fear but anticipation, his gaze intensifying on the door's rusted lock, as if it promised salvation or revelation. Outside, the rain softened for a moment, allowing the distant hum of a neighbor's porch light to pierce the night, a subtle intrusion that felt like eyes peering through the veil. Sarah whispered to herself, "What are you waiting for?" unaware that the answer lurked just beyond, ready to pull them both into its grasp. Sarah's mind drifted back to the sun-dappled afternoons in their city apartment where laughter had once bounced off the walls like light refracting through crystal, her husband's easy grin as he tossed a salad, his hand brushing hers in a casual promise of forever. They had built a life together, simple yet vibrant, filled with weekend hikes and whispered dreams of a family that never came. But that night, the rain-slicked road had stolen it all. The car hydroplaning his desperate swerve to avoid a deer, the impact that echoed in her nightmares like a door slamming shut on hope. She had been in the passenger seat frozen, her scream lodged uselessly in her throat. Why hadn't she grabbed the wheel, warned him sooner? The guilt gnawed at her like rust on iron, corroding the vitality she once possessed, leaving her a hollow vessel who fled to this decrepit house in search of oblivion. Now in the flickering candlelight, those memories surged like floodwaters, drowning her in regret. She clutched the edge of the table knuckles white, wondering if adopting Echo was just another futile grasp at redemption, a way to save something when she couldn't save him. The house's shadows seemed to nod in agreement, wrapping around her like the fog of isolation that had become her constant companion, a stark contrast to the warmth she had lost forever. Each morning blurred into the next for Sarah, a monotonous ritual etched in the dim glow of dawn, filtering through grimy windows, the kettle's whistle piercing the silence like a distant cry, coffee poured into the same chipped mug that bore faint stains from better days. She moved through the house like a ghost, unpacking boxes, only to stare blankly at their contents, a framed photo of her husband tucked away to avoid the stab of memory books stacked in corners as barriers against the emptiness. Echo's presence was a quiet intrusion, his fixation on the cellar door a puzzle she avoided, much like her own reflection in the mirror eyes, sunken hair unkempt, a testament to the numbness that armored her heart. She fed him mechanically, setting the bowl down without meeting his gaze, retreating to the living room, where she scrolled through her phone, the blue light a cold substitute for human connection. The routine was her shield, repetitive motions warding off the waves of grief that threatened to pull her under. Yet in quiet moments, as the rain pattered endlessly, cracks appeared, her hand hovering over Echo's bowl, a fleeting urge to call his name suppressed before it could expose her vulnerability. The house amplified this frozen state, its empty rooms echoing her inner void, a sanctuary turned prison where defense meant survival, but at the cost of truly living. Echo's fur bore the map of his torment, matted patches scarred by old wounds that whispered of chains too tight and hands too cruel, his limp a permanent echo of a blow that had shattered more than bone. Rescued from the shelter's cold kennel, where he huddled in the shadows labeled unadoptable for his mute withdrawal, he carried the weight of betrayal like a collar grown into his skin, faded tags etched with a child's scrawled name, Buddy, now barely legible under layers of grime. Years ago, he had been a pup in a sunlit yard tail wagging for a boy with laughter like birdsong, fetching sticks and guarding secrets under an old oak. But one night, shouts had turned to screams, a figure in the dark wielding rage, and the boy vanished, leaving Echo chained in the cellar, starving his howls unanswered as the door sealed shut. Survival had forged him into this sentinel instincts honed by hunger and fear, his eyes holding the depth of oceans where trust had drowned, flinching at raised voices, retreating from outstretched hands, yet harboring a flicker of loyalty that refused to extinguish. In the shelter he had stared at the bars, much like he now stared at the cellar door, a silent vow etched in his posture, waiting for the ghost of his boy to call him home. Sarah saw fragments of this in his scarred muzzle, the way he avoided her gaze, his body a fortress against further pain mirroring her own armored heart. The rain outside seemed to weep for him each drop, a testament to the endurance that kept him alive, a survivor whose betrayal had carved canyons in his soul, yet left room for a tentative bridge toward healing. In the dim hallway, Sarah and Echo existed as reflections in a cracked mirror, their emptiness a shared language spoken in sighs and averted eyes. Her grief a silent storm, his mistrust a fortified wall both retreating into shadows that felt safer than light. She would sit cross-legged on the floor, unpacking a box, only to let her hands fall idle, much like Echo's paws that twitched but never moved from the door's threshold, their rhythms syncing in unspoken harmony. When thunder cracked, Sarah flinched her shoulders, hunching as memories flooded in, and Echo's ears flattened his body, tensing against phantom threats, their vulnerabilities mirroring like ripples in a still pond, disturbed by the same stone. Slowly, in these quiet parallels, recognition dawned. Sarah's tentative offering of water met with Echo's cautious sniff, not acceptance yet, but a pause in the retreat, a nonverbal cue that acknowledged the other's pain without demanding more. Their healing began in these mirrored steps, her unpacking a photo of her husband paralleling Echo's subtle shift closer to her warmth trust, building through the quiet presence that filled the voids they both carried. The house watched them, its creaks a gentle nudge toward connection, as if the walls themselves understood how two wounded souls could find solace in mutual silence, their arcs intertwining like vines reclaiming a forgotten garden. The storm clawed at the house like a beast denied entry, wind howling through cracks in the walls, rattling the windows as if demanding secrets be spilled. Echo's growls deepened into frantic whines, his paws scraping against the cellar door with a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat racing toward collapse nails, leaving fresh gouges in the wood like desperate pleas etched in flesh. Sarah froze in the kitchen, her coffee mug slipping from her fingers to shatter on the floor, the porcelain fragments scattering like broken promises underfoot, the sharp crack blending with Echo's cries, pulling her toward the hallway where shadows twisted like forgotten regrets. His body trembled not from cold, but from an inner compulsion, eyes wide and wild, reflecting lightning flashes that illuminated the door's rusted lock like a keyhole to oblivion. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth rising from below, mingling with the metallic tang of rain urgency coiling in Sarah's chest like a spring wound too tight. "What's down there that's got you like this?" She thought her pulse sinking with his frantic scratches, the chaos outside mirroring the turmoil within, forcing her to confront the barrier that had become their shared obsession. Echo pressed his muzzle against the seam, a low guttural plea escaping him. His scarred frame a vessel of unspoken terror and need, drawing Sarah closer, despite the fear knotting her gut. Sarah's hand hovered over the cellar door's handle, fingers trembling like leaves in the storm's grip, her mind a battlefield where logic clashed with the raw pull of compassion. What if it's nothing? What if it's everything? She inwardly argued, visions of her husband's mangled car flashing like lightning, a reminder that caring had once led to shattering loss. Why risk it again for this dog? This stranger with scars that echoed her own. Echo's whines pierced her defenses, his eyes locking onto hers with a vulnerability that stripped away her armor, pleading without words for her to bridge the gap she feared. Logic whispered, retreat. The house was old, the sounds mere settling opening the door, an invitation to chaos. She couldn't control her grief, a heavy chain holding her back. Yet empathy surged a warm current against the cold tide of isolation. Echo's subtle lean toward her, a sign of trust budding in the dirt of despair, tipping the scale, making her question if ignoring him would be another betrayal like the one she inflicted on herself every silent night. The internal storm raged, fear of attachment warring with the ache to heal, until his paw touched her shoe, a gentle nudge that shifted her from paralysis to possibility. Sarah's resolve hardened like steel forged in the storm's fury, her hands fumbling through the cluttered drawer for the crowbar, its cold metal a grounding weight against her racing heart. With Echo's whines escalating into urgent barks that reverberated through the house like calls from the abyss, she approached the cellar door, knees weak but steps deliberate, the wood splintering slightly under the tool's pry as hinges screamed in protest after years of silence. Shards of rust flaked off like dried blood, the lock giving way with a final reluctant snap that echoed her own breaking barriers, messy, imperfect but irreversible, the door creaking open to reveal a yawning darkness thick with the musty scent of decay and forgotten time. Echo surged forward, his caution melting into frantic exploration, nose to the damp stone floor, tail low, but wagging in hesitant bursts, his body brushing against Sarah's leg, as if acknowledging her role in this unleashing. She followed hesitantly, flashlight beams slicing through the gloom, illuminating cobwebs, like veils over secrets, her breath catching at the first glimpse of disturbed earth in the corner, a shallow mound that hinted at horrors buried but not gone. The act felt like plunging into icy water, shocking and committing Echo's presence, a tether pulling her deeper, their bond solidifying in the chaos of discovery. No turning back now from the path they had cracked open together. In the cellar's oppressive chill, Sarah knelt beside the unearthed mound, her flashlight revealing the stark white of bones peeking through the soil like forgotten relics. Echo trembling as he nosed closer, his whines softening to a low keen that tugged at her soul. She reached out instinctively, not to the bones, but to him, her hand hovering before gently resting on his flank, his muscles tensing at first, then relaxing under her touch, a fragile bridge forming in the dim light, where shadows danced like hesitant partners. The air hung heavy with the scent of earth and age, a child's rusted toy half buried nearby, catching her eye, its faded colors a poignant echo of lost innocence that mirrored her own shattered dreams. Echo leaned into her, his scarred head bowing as if in gratitude, allowing her to brush away the dirt from his paws, the act a silent vow of care amid the mess of revelation. Imperfect with her tears, mixing into the soil, but real, binding them in mutual vulnerability. She whispered promises into the darkness. "We're in this together now." Her voice cracking while Echo's tail thumped softly against the stone, the first sign of acceptance, their trust budding like a fragile shoot in barren ground. As they ascended the stairs, the open door behind them a symbol of irreversible change. Sarah felt the weight of isolation lift slightly, replaced by the warmth of shared purpose, healing's tentative dawn breaking through the storm. The cellar's chill lingered in the air like a reluctant ghost seeping into the bones of the house. Even as Sarah and Echo emerged into the dimly lit hallway, the open door behind them a gaping wound that neither dared close. Echo retreated to the far corner of the living room, his massive frame curling into a tight ball against the wall. Eyes half-lidded, but watchful, a low rumble escaping his throat whenever Sarah's shadow fell too close. She respected the invisible line he drew, sitting on the worn armchair across the room, her own body language a mirror of his guarded posture. Arms crossed, gaze averted the silence between them, thick as fog rolling in from the autumn fields outside. Rain pattered against the windows in a steady rhythm, amplifying the quiet standoff. Echo's ears twitching at every creak of the settling house, his scarred muzzle tucked into his paws, as if shielding himself from the vulnerability of trust. Dawn filtered through the grimy windows like a hesitant promise, casting a pale glow on the living room, where Sarah stirred her body aching from the couch's unforgiving springs, mirroring the deeper ache in her chest from unearthed memories. Echo remained in his corner, his breathing steady, but eyes alert, watching as she rose and moved to the kitchen, with deliberate slowness, careful not to startle him, her own pain manifesting in the way her hands trembled while slicing breadcrumbs, scattering like fragments of her shattered life. She placed a bowl of softened kibble mixed with scraps of chicken near his spot, not too close, retreating to the armchair with her own meager breakfast, the act a small offering in their unspoken dialogue of suffering. Echo's nose twitched, scenting the food from afar, his gaze shifting between the bowl and Sarah, wary, but intrigued, his body uncoiling slightly as hunger warred with caution. Internally, Sarah wrestled with echoes of her husband's final meal, shared in laughter, now replaced by this solitary ritual, her offering to Echo a bridge over the chasm of her isolation. Sunlight pierced the dust-laden air of the living room like hesitant fingers probing old wounds, illuminating the child's rusted toy, a small metal truck, its paint chipped like forgotten promises that Sarah had carefully retrieved from the cellar's depths and placed on the windowsill. As she dusted it gently, her fingers tracing the faded red cab, a wave of flashbacks crashed over her lazy Sunday mornings with her husband, his hand on her belly, as they dreamed of a child who would play with such toys, laughter echoing in their sunlit apartment before the accident stole those visions, leaving her with an emptiness that echoed like a hollow drum. We were going to fill a home with giggles and tiny footsteps. She thought, her chest tightening the toy, a cruel reminder of what grief had barrened her eyes, misting as the weight of unfulfilled family pressed down, like the house's sagging beams. Echo from his corner lifted his head ears, perking at the soft clink of the toy against the glass, his scarred muzzle inching forward in a slow crawl, nostrils flaring as if scenting ghosts from his own past. In his mind's eye, or perhaps in the flicker of his gaze, flashed images of a boy with tousled hair tossing that same truck across a grassy yard, Echo bounding after it with youthful vigor, tail a blur of joy before the night of shouts and disappearance shattered that bond, leaving him chained in darkness. A rogue gust of wind slipped through the cracked window like an uninvited guest carrying a crisp autumn leaf that twirled into the living room landing with a whisper on the faded rug between Sarah and Echo. She watched it skitter across the floor, propelled by another breeze, and to her surprise, Echo's ears perked, his body uncoiling from its guarded curl as he pounced tentatively, paws batting at the leaf with a playfulness that seemed dredged from some long-buried well of joy. The sight, his massive frame reduced to puppy-like antics, tail sweeping the air in hesitant wags, coaxed a soft laugh from Sarah's lips, the sound foreign and fragile, like sunlight breaking through perpetual clouds, warming the room's stale air with its unexpected melody. When was the last time I laughed? She wondered inwardly, the vibration in her chest, loosening knots of grief, tied tight since her husband's death. The leaf's erratic dance mirroring the unpredictable spark of life rekindling within her. Moonlight filtered through the lace curtains like silver threads, weaving a fragile tapestry over the living room where Sarah lay on the couch, her breathing uneven in the grip of a restless dream, her husband's voice calling from the rain-slicked road, fading into silence that clawed at her heart. Echo, who had maintained his vigilant distance through the evening's quiet rituals, stirred from his blanket in the corner, his paws patting softly across the creaking floorboards, each step a hesitant whisper in the night's hush. He paused at the couch's edge, his scarred muzzle inches from her dangling hand, nostrils flaring as he inhaled her scent, a mix of coffee tears and the faint earthiness from the cellar, his eyes reflecting the moon's glow with a depth that held years of guarded sorrow. Internally, Sarah stirred awake at the subtle shift in the air, her mind foggy with remnants of loss. But she remained still, heart pounding like a drum in a cavern, sensing this moment's delicacy. The evening settled over the house like a shroud, the storm's remnants dripping from the eaves in a rhythmic lament that masked subtler disturbances as Echo's ears suddenly pricked up from his spot beside Sarah on the couch. His body tensed, a low vibration rumbling through his chest, before manifesting as a faint growl directed not at the familiar creaks, but toward the window overlooking the neighbor's dimly lit porch, his posture shifting from relaxed companionship to rigid alertness, hackles rising like silent alarms. Sarah, absorbed in the child's journal, unearthed from the cellar pages filled with a boy's scrawled adventures with his dog Buddy, felt the change ripple through the air, her hand pausing mid-stroke on Echo's fur, a chill unrelated to the cooling night air crawling up her spine. "What's got you spooked now?" she wondered inwardly, her grief momentarily sidelined by the dog's primal instinct, his gaze piercing the darkness outside where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. The knock at the door echoed through the house like a thunderclap from a clear sky, jolting Sarah from her reverie over the journal, her heart leaping as Echo erupted from his watchful stance into a frenzy of snarls, lips curled back to reveal yellowed fangs, his body a coiled spring of raw aggression. The neighbor, an elderly man with a weathered face and eyes like shadowed pits introduced earlier as Mr. Harlan from next door, stood on the porch, pipe in hand, his casual inquiry about borrowing some sugar, laced with an undercurrent of scrutiny that set Sarah's nerves alight. Echo lunged forward, only restrained by Sarah's instinctive grip on his collar, his barks thundering like accusation's hackles raised in a ridge of fury that transformed him from gentle companion to primal guardian, his eyes locked on Harlan with a recognition that chilled the air. Internally, Sarah's mind raced flashes of her husband's accident colliding with the journal's cryptic entries about a mean man who scared the boy, her panic rising like bile as Echo's protective rage mirrored her own suppressed fears. "He's sensing something I can't." She thought her voice trembling as she stammered a polite refusal. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Lee, the anthropologist's voice crackling with urgency as she revealed the bone's preliminary analysis. A child's remains from decades ago, matching a cold case of a missing boy named Tommy, whose family once owned the house. The cause of death, blunt force trauma that screamed foul play. Before Sarah could process, the back door creaked open uninvited. Harlan stepping into the kitchen with a feigned concern. "Heard the commotion, thought I'd check." His presence igniting Echo like a fuse, the dog exploding forward in a blur of fur and fury, slamming into the intruder with a guttural snarl that filled the room like thunder. Recognition was instantaneous. Echo's eyes widened in primal recollection, the scent of pipe tobacco and old sweat triggering memories of that fateful night, the man burying the boy in the cellar, chaining the pup to silence his witness, while Harlan's face paled a flash of guilt, cracking his composed mask as he raised a hand defensively. "Call off your mutt." Sarah froze for a heartbeat, the journal's descriptions aligning with Harlan's features, the mean neighbor who argued with Tommy's parents, her fear morphing into resolve as she grabbed a nearby lamp, wielding it like a weapon in the tense standoff. Echo circled Harlan, growls low and menacing, his limp forgotten in the surge of protective instinct, teeth bared inches from the man's leg, the air thick with the metallic tang of adrenaline and the damp earth scent wafting from the open cellar. Harlan's voice turned venomous. "That dog should have stayed buried with the kid." A confession slipping in the heat, his hand dipping toward his pocket, where a knife glinted, escalating the confrontation into a visceral clash of past and present. The kitchen floor felt like a battlefield's aftermath, littered with overturned chairs and smears of blood from Echo's bite, the air still humming with the echo of shouts, as Harlan stumbled out the back door, fleeing into the night like a shadow banished by dawn. Sarah collapsed against the wall, her legs giving way as adrenaline ebbed, leaving her trembling in waves that mirrored the rain, resuming its patter outside her hands, reaching instinctively for Echo, who limped toward her, his side heaving a superficial gash on his shoulder, weeping crimson. She pulled him close, arms encircling his massive frame, burying her face in his fur that smelled of earth and loyalty, his warmth seeping into her like a promise whispered in the dark. "We're safe now together." Night cloaked the house in velvet darkness, the rain returning as a relentless murmur against the roof, each drop a subtle drum beat building toward an unseen crescendo, while Sarah paced the living room, the journal clutched like a talisman in her hands. Echo's growls started low, a vibration in his chest that escalated as he stared fixedly at the window, his instincts sharp as a blade honed by survival ears, pivoting toward the faint rustle outside. Perhaps a branch or something more sinister slinking through the shadows. Sarah felt the prickle of being watched, her skin crawling like insects under her sweater, glancing out to catch a fleeting silhouette against the neighbor's fence. Harlan's form lurking in the downpour, his eyes glinting like coals in the brief flash of lightning. He's not done. She thought inwardly, fear blending with a fierce resolve born from their shared trials, the bond with Echo, now her unyielding anchor, his presence a shield against the encroaching dread. The back door shattered inward with a crack like breaking bones, glass scattering across the kitchen floor like diamonds forged in violence. Harlan bursting through the threshold, his face twisted into a mask of desperate rage, a hunting knife glinting in his gnarled fist under the flickering overhead light. Rain poured in behind him, a cold torrent mirroring the flood of terror that surged through Sarah's veins. Her scream caught in her throat as Echo exploded forward, a blur of muscle and fury, colliding with Harlan in a tangle of snarls and curses that filled the room like a storm's roar. This is it. The end he buried coming back to claim us. Sarah thought, her mind flashing to the journal's final entry. Tommy's childish scrawl pleading for help from the mean man, now incarnate before her, his breath ragged with the scent of whiskey and decay. In that suspended heartbeat amid the chaos, Sarah's eyes locked onto Echo's weakening form, his blood pooling on the tiles like spilled ink from a tragic tale, and a surge of fierce determination ignited within her, transforming terror into unyielding resolve. She would not lose another soul to senseless violence. Not this dog who had become her mirror and her salvation. Harlan's knife hovered perilously close, his grip tightening on her arm like a vice forged from decades of hidden guilt. But Sarah twisted free with a guttural cry, her free hand snatching a cast-iron skillet from the counter, swinging it with all her might into his shoulder, the impact resounding like a bell tolling the end of his reign of shadows. For Tommy, for Echo, for us, she thought inwardly, the decision crystallizing in a flash: protect or perish, commit to this bond, or let grief claim her forever. As Echo, drawing from reservoirs of primal strength, surged upright despite his wounds, clamping jaws around Harlan's leg, pulling him off balance in a symphony of growls and shouts. The action was irreversible, Sarah following through by tackling Harlan to the ground, the knife clattering away across the floor like a discarded secret, her knees pinning his chest as she fumbled for her phone, dialing emergency with trembling fingers, her voice steady despite the storm within. Intruder, send help now. The sterile hum of the veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights cast a soft, unyielding glow over the recovery room, where Sarah sat on a worn plastic chair, her hand resting lightly on Echo's bandaged side as he lay on the padded table, his breaths coming in slow, measured rises and falls, like the tide retreating after a storm. Police lights had long since faded from the house's driveway, Harlan handcuffed and carted away, his confessions spilling like overdue rain. But here in this quiet space scented with antiseptic and faint animal musk, the frenzy felt distant, a echo muffled by survival's gentle hush. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the gauze, her movements deliberate and unhurried, each touch a pause laden with the weight of what they'd endured. The knife's glint, the blood's warmth now reduced to stitches and saline. Days blurred into a steady rhythm back at the house, now bathed in the soft amber of morning light filtering through cleaned windows, where Sarah moved with purposeful slowness, setting down a bowl of softened food for Echo, his nose twitching at the savory steam rising like gentle invitations to life renewed. He approached tentatively at first, his limp easing with each passing hour, taking bites while maintaining eye contact with her deep amber pools reflecting her own gradual thaw, the act of eating a mirrored ritual that wove their recoveries into one tapestry. She sat nearby, legs crossed on the rug, her fingers absently stroking the journal's cover, its pages now a chronicle of closure with Dr. Lee's annotations confirming justice for Tommy, the sensory details grounding her, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the faint rustle of turning pages, Echo's contented sighs blending with her own. The autumn sun hung low, casting elongated shadows that stretched like fingers, releasing their grip on the past as Sarah clipped the leash, not out of necessity, but habit, to Echo's collar, his eyes lifting to hers, with a quiet, knowing breath, sinking in warm puffs against her hand. They stepped out together, the gravel path crunching underfoot like whispered affirmations. Echo's gait steady now, no limp to betray old wounds, his flank brushing her leg in rhythmic assurance. We've come through the dark. Sarah thought her internal voice a soft murmur amid the rustle of leaves, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and renewal, their steps falling in unison, a dance of synchronized souls where fear once led. Echo paused at the gate, glancing back at the house, the cellar door a sealed memory, and then forward tail sweeping the air, responding to her gentle call of his name with a nudge of his head against her thigh, the gesture an intimate seal of trust, eyes locking in a gaze that released the last echoes of solitude. In that motion, breath and stride intertwined, emotional chains dissolved like mist in morning light, their side-by-side walk a quiet rebirth etched in the simple poetry of forward movement.